braving the morning to be here.
Can we have shots now?
Maybe of espresso?
Yeah.
So great. Well, we wanted to dive a little bit into team building, company culture, leadership, both for those of you who are in or expect to be in relatively large, established organizations, and also for those of you that may be building teams, whether in a company or as a startup founder. So I'm going to start off, Cathie, by asking you a couple of questions, and then we can flip it. And I wanted to start with, you've seen an incredible variety of different teams at USA Today, at Hearst, where you were chairman for
Umpteen years.
Umpteen years, exactly. And just kind of to lay the groundwork, what do you see as the core of a great team?
I think the core of a great team is when you have a shared vision. When I was recruited to USA Today, which was about a year after the newspaper launched, my first meeting, we were headquartered in Washington, D.C., but my first meeting was in New York City. And I will never forget. So it was at, let's just say, 10 o'clock, and I get a phone call like 20 of 10, and an assistant says to me, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm on the 28th floor." "Why?" She said, "Well, you're not in the meeting." I said, "Well, it starts in 20 minutes. No, Mr. Newhart, who was the founder of the newspaper and the chairman of the parent company, always starts a meeting early. So part of that is like, oh, okay, you better figure out the culture real quick. I walk into the conference room, and the walls are dark gray, really like a charcoal gray fabric, and the table is set up in a square, like a U. He sits alone. He wasn't there, but he sits alone, and then the executives are lined up here with their names in front of them. And his toy was to change those nameplates for every meeting. So you knew when you were in like deep doo-doo, if you were like right next to him, and if you were like in Siberia, you're going to be like, okay, that moment. So he comes in, and I go like, oh, I cannot believe this. He's got dark aviator glasses on, and he's got a dark suit, dark tie. He kind of looked like he was out of Las Vegas. And so he sits there for a few minutes. He introduces me and another guy that had joined the same day. He's sitting across from me, an ad agency guy. And we're looking at each other like, where have we come from? And sort of not even a pleasant welcome. This is Cathie Black. This is Ray Galke. And then he takes, in the old days, when you might get like a medical bill and the sides were perforated and you opened it this way and you open it on the other side. So he takes this thing and he goes, "Who the did this?" And he opens it up, and it's a circulation promotion for the newspaper. But he is saying it with such derision, like, what idiot would ever have thought of this as a promotion? Why would you want to subscribe to USA Today with its looks like a medical bill? And he wads it up, and he throws it in the face of the circulation director. This guy's like that. And Ray Galke, the new guy, and I are like looking at each other like, we have just gotten on the Titanic. And so that's one kind of culture to create. And when the newspaper was really in dire straits, it's a long time ago, but it was hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars, we get a phone call individually at home on a Sunday afternoon, on a Saturday night, saying, be at the airport, there was corporate aircraft, be at the airport 4 o'clock on Sunday, meaning the next day, for a very important meeting. He lived in Cocoa Beach, Florida, near the astronauts. So nobody calls anybody else because you don't really know who's coming. You get on the airplane, we're all like, oh shit, what has happened? And we figured the newspaper's going to fold or whatever. So we get to his house, and he has kind of a conference room, and we all tread up. There's like 7 of us. And he begins this diatribe, just going crazy, saying, look, I'm a lot older than any of you, but if you screw this thing up, your names will go down in history of having failed launching the most exciting new product innovation in the entire history of the newspaper industry. So we're all still sort of looking at ourselves like that. Okay, fast forward, meeting ends in like 40 minutes, all just him like screaming and ranting and raving. I was actually doing okay on the advertising side after maybe 8 or 9 months, so I got less of it that day, but there were other times when I got it all. And so we were to be at this local restaurant in Cocoa Beach at 6 o'clock on Sunday night. So we go back, we don't bother changing. We go to this very crowded fish restaurant. We all remember this vividly. We walk through the restaurant. We've been there many times, had no idea there was a private room. We open up the door of the room, and Al Newhart is dressed as Jesus Christ. I am not kidding. He has a crown of thorns on. He has the white garb. There is a cross, a big cross, like 8 feet tall or 6 feet tall, at the end of this little skinny, narrow room. And then we realized that, in fact, he's got a couple of other people. There are 12 of us. It is, as they say, the Last Supper. And if imagery can set a culture, believe me, those were two examples which, as you can tell, are deeply embedded in my mind. So I would suggest for culture, there's the intimidation culture, and then there's a culture that you can have of trying to have a shared vision. Some of these things sound trite, but an agreement on the mission, an agreement on the vision, and I would suggest always collaboration, because you cannot do it yourself. You have got to have people who are with you, because they are, in fact, the leaders and the managers and the soldiers who will get things done. So it's alchemy. It's never one thing or the other. Some things work better than others, and you keep working at it. Another time when I was recruited to Hearst Magazines back in '96, Hearst is a huge corporation, a $4 billion corporation in every form of media imaginable. I was running the magazine division, which was very successful, but very conservative. And so most of the top jobs were filled by men. I was the first woman who had come in, and we had publishers who were female, but in a top executive capacity. And so I kind of worked my way around. I have actually a fair degree of patience, because I figured at Hearst, I knew I could accomplish whatever I wanted to, but because it is a privately held company, things take longer. You can get to where you want to get, but they take longer. So I decided to do my first kind of off-site management meeting. And of course, what would the guys expect? Arizona, the Greenbrier, San Diego, someplace, of course, where they could play golf. And I said to our head of communications, Deb Shriver, who's just awesome, I had brought her in a few months after I started. I said, no, Deb, I know where I want to go. She said, where do you want to go? I said, I want to go to the Delano. Now, this is when the Delano in South Beach, Miami was very new, very hot, et cetera. And she said, I love the idea. Have you been there? No, but I've read a lot about it. I know it's exactly what I want. Because I knew instinctively inside Cathie that I had to both use visual elements as well as what I said to get the message across that this was a different company. We had to innovate, we had to launch new products, we had to sell some stuff or close some stuff or whatever, but we had to really move forward, and we had to move quickly. Our biggest competitor in New York City was Condé Nast, and we were always kind of in that battle with Condé Nast, which is never a good thing to only be thinking of your competitor as opposed to just moving ahead. So the Delano, have any of you ever been there? I know a lot of West Coast people are here, but so that when the Delano was new, South Beach was like, the hot place. But as you walk into the Delano, it's a beautiful hotel. There are dark mahogany walls and these kind of filmy white linen curtains. And I thought, I knew by this time what it looked like. So the main, room there, maybe there were 80 of us or so, 80 or 90 people. So my opening morning remarks were against this background of these white kind of gauzy curtains in this private, in the ballroom type place. And so the imagery was perfect, because I said one of the reasons why I was brought to Hearst, was to blow the dust off the curtains at Hearst. So that was the beginning of my building a culture within the organization of innovation and taking chances, taking risks, all those kinds of things.
So that leads in exactly to what I was going to ask next, because sometimes you're brought into a culture that has already been established before you're there. And you have to make these decisions. Do you try and, particularly for those people who are potentially reporting up through you, do you move off in a different direction and try and kind of establish a new culture? Do you help them navigate and adapt the existing culture, especially if you bring in additional people? How do you think about that in terms of both working with existing people in the organization, potentially hiring new people, and kind of setting out the culture that you're aiming to have?
Well, even using the example of the PR person that I brought in, I knew that she was an innovator. She had great ideas. She was just fantastic. You need, I think, if you're the person coming into a large organization, and we had approximately 1,600 employees, you've got to have people that you can trust, that know, they may not know you. She knew me pretty well because we worked together for a couple of years, but you've got to be able to trust them because, again, they're going to help you move your agenda forward. But you can't get rid of everybody. God knows there were people that I would love to have been able to do that on day two. people who'd been in that culture for a very long time, somebody who'd been passed over twice for my job. That didn't make it very easy. I can assure you that he didn't exactly get aligned with me very often. But if you're mature, you begin to understand you just can't throw everybody out the window and build your own thing. So you begin to salt people, not always, in the top level jobs, but you begin to salt people who can help you get there faster. And you got to figure out who are the obstructionists. And I think that's one of the things that one learns about even meetings. There are meetings with, say, 8 people around a conference table. There are the take over the meeting type people. There are those kind of sitting back and never saying a word. But the most deadly ones are the passive-aggressive ones, who are sitting there shaking their head, great idea, and then doing nothing, or in fact completely reversing what you're talking about. So it's a process of figuring out who can move forward and who really has to be moved out, and in some cases who's got to go like tomorrow.
Yeah, and how do you make those decisions? I know that both for, I'm sure, entrepreneurs and seasoned executives alike, firing someone is one of those very challenging situations. You never want to get in it, but it's a kind of common part of both building a team and ensuring that a culture is moving in the right direction. Because we've all heard the expression. It's very, very true. I think with people that one bad apple often can spread to others. Can you talk about a couple times that maybe have been either particularly challenging where you've had to fire someone, lessons you've learned, any kind of, I'm sure you have some more stories.
Kathryn and I talked a little bit about this yesterday. I mean, firing is really hard. And again, I think as you get a little bit older, you realize that you're not just firing one person. If they have an assistant, that person is probably going to go. And then you have to remember that people are part of the family. They've got their own, organization at home in whatever capacity. And so it has, many tentacles that kind of come out. But what's happened, I'd say, over the last decade is that you have to be extremely careful about firing, frankly, in a way that you didn't have to do 20 years ago. Hey, goodbye, you're fired. And, there wasn't litigation, there wasn't this, there wasn't that. And one of the things that I read about and have put into practice over the years is that ideally, if you can, and I know a lot of people have open space, which makes it much harder, but you go to the person as opposed to having the person come to you, and you go with someone else. And if you have an HR department, that person. Because if you have set a meeting with a person and they're on they know they're pretty rocky to begin with, you don't need some long speech, because once they kind of once they look at the look on your face, they know it's over. So by then they're only thinking about their next or their problems or their this or their that. And you learn a little bit more about being fair, about listening to them, but you get up and you leave. That's the best thing about going somewhere else. If you have an office and they're in your office, it's kind of hard to say, like, I think we've just covered this, we don't need to go through this again, to hear the person defend their job or to, criticize or, whatever it is. But the adding of another person, which obviously is representing management, is a very good thing, because then you don't get into he said, she said, and you've got somebody that's kind of, recording this, and it helps you out in the future. And in an ideal world, there's a track of this person have been putting out a performance review period and whatever, but the truth is I haven't seen it isn't that it's not effective, it just more often than not is just never done properly. Mm-hmm. But it's hard. I mean, and I've closed magazines, and anything we do in New York is very public. And I closed a magazine. Some of you would know the name Tina Brown, who did the Daily Beast and then Newsweek, and has had a meteoric career. But she started a magazine called Talk. And we were brought in as financial partners with Harvey Weinstein about 6 or 8 months into it, and they were spending money like crazy. And it didn't take us long to figure out that it's a great idea before its time. It's an LA and New York magazine, but in fact it has a cost structure that it's got to be like a billion circulation magazine. And so I had the good fortune, and I've always felt this. If you're the boss, you take, there's a lot of good things that come with being the top guy, and there's also a lot of, you do it. You get out there. You're the one that is seen. You don't send somebody from another department or the head of HR to go and close a magazine. And so, I went down to Talk Magazine. There's maybe, 80 or 90 people. They knew what was going to happen. They went crazy. They're all tweeting, and, well, it's pre-tweeting, but, they're all on their cell phones, so the press is out before you even finish the meeting. But more importantly, it sounds kind of silly now, but they wanted to print the next issue. They were almost unimpressed with the current issue. I said, no, this is the last issue. No, we got articles in the pipeline, whatever. And as our head of HR said to me, what you don't want in any situation is another cycle of news 3.5 weeks later when the last issue comes out. So you got to figure that kind of timing out. And there's no perfect day to fire somebody or to close a magazine or whatever. And there's lots of different people who talk about that.
Yeah. And so then I guess one more question I want to make sure we cover. I think that through some of the examples you provided, some really great color about different leadership styles. And you've obviously someone that I think a lot of people look up to as just a very, very effective leader. But let's say for someone who would like to be better at that, how do you learn to be a better leader? How do you kind of practice, or what would you say to someone who wants to improve? Whether they're already very far in their career and they just want to kind of get to the next level, or whether they're just getting started.
I think everybody's different. Everybody's got a different style. But it's pretty easy, I think, to look up to the next level, whatever that next level is. And this is what all of us have done in early jobs. At least that's what I would do. Think, gee, I think I'm almost as good as they are, or I'm as smart as they are, or whatever. So you sort of observe different people's styles. And I think you gather who you are. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to be authentic. Anybody here at the CES show back in January? Okay, do you remember the opening night, or after, whatever it was, the Samsung speech? And when Steve Ballmer almost jumped out of a cake? This is, I say this respectfully of the gentleman, I can't think of the CEO of Samsung, and it was about a $5 million set. I mean, it was absolutely unbelievable. And he was, in my opinion, trying to be someone that he wasn't. It's very rehearsed, it's very studied, it's very scripted. And he was great, and Samsung, of course, practically owned the entire CES show. But at the end of the day, I guess I would rather have heard him be more of a person than trying to be somebody that probably was not his easiest, and it would be a really difficult setting for anybody. Ballmer obviously finds it a little more comfortable. But so I guess along the way have looked at men's styles, women's styles, everything from, how do you get unattached from a podium? How do you lead a team? How are you firm? How are you strong? How are you tough when you have to be tough? Those are things that I think kind of come with learning and come with, making a lot of mistakes. When I was a young, I guess I was 27, which of course most of you have had 3 companies by the time you're 27. I thought it was a big deal to be the ad manager of Ms. But anyway, we had 5 or 6 salespeople, and it was really tough back then. I mean, it was really, we couldn't sell any advertising in this magazine that I thought everybody would be dying to get into for the women's market. But I guess I was very bossy, which of course is only a word that is applied to women, right? It's true. I was actually trying to think about, all right, what's the male equivalent of bossy? Tyrant? I don't know. So we had these, what is it? Oh, asshole. Okay.
But I'll say
that is actually not gender specific.
I will say though, I think there's a great tweet I saw once which said that society has a love-hate relationship with assholes and a hate-hate relationship with bitches, which I think is also kind of the interesting
there's
flip
this
side.
whole table. I can't find it. It was written years ago, and it's nothing new. There's like a list of adjectives applied to a woman that are extremely negative, and the same adjectives when applied to a man are, oh my God, he's great, he'll be a leader, he'll be a this or that. But because I love reading in Sheryl Sandberg's book about how when she was like 5, she was directing her like little sister and brother to do all this stuff around the house and obey her and whatever, and her mother said, of course, she was bossy, so of course she became a big boss. But so you kind of figure these things out. Anyway, let me finish my story about Ms., which is really really funny. So we were having a little bitty sales meeting at some crappy little hotel, and so the sales team came into my room at about 8 o'clock or something, I forget, it was at night, and they said that if I didn't quit, they were going to quit. And I was flabbergasted. I thought I was great. And I was just so horrified. And I guess a couple of things. I hadn't listened to any of their complaints. We didn't really have a forum for sharing how we really felt. And if you're in sales and you really are not selling, it's extremely discouraging. And I guess we took it out in different ways among the 6 or 7 of us. And of course, what I would do, because they were in a big group office and I had a little itty-bitty office outside of theirs, I would go into the office of their office probably, and I had a zillion accounts that I handled too, but I would go in like 100 times a day, I guess, as they told me, how did it go? How did it go at Revlon? How did it go at General Motors? How did it go? And they were like so sick and tired of me, like just being all over them as a micromanager. And it was a really bitter night. But I said, look, you've got 2 choices. I am not quitting. So we can either, here we are in the dawn of the women's movement of sisterhood, and we're like ready to claw each other's eyes out. And I said, we can sit here until we figure out how do we pull ourselves back together to really try to achieve the goals, because what we are going to do is very important in terms of the women's movement, the women's market, and all of that. And we will be stars if we can figure this out. And, pick and shovel work and whatever, but we left the room at like 1 o'clock in the morning, agreeing that Kathy would change her behavior. And I guess I did. I kind of mollified or modified my approach and realized that they really didn't need somebody asking them 16 times a day, how did the Revlon call go or whatever. And it was brutal, and so you begin to understand that listening is a really important part of being a leader and being a manager. And you've got to get very good at body language and trying to figure out, how are they? And, which gives me a good chance I said, look, she's the co-founder of a young business. And we've been talking about team building. And just to put it on the record, I'm a small investor in the Muse. And when Kathryn asked me about this, I said, great to interview me, but I think the audience ought to be able to hear from you as well, because I admire anybody with the guts to start their own business from practically a blank sheet of paper. But you've done a lot of things about building team and culture, sharing weekly meetings, every couple of months meetings. I heard yesterday, I can't remember who said it, but Retro Fridays. There's just different ways to kind of get at people, kind of coming together and understanding where are we going, not where is Kathryn going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it actually, fits in very well to what you were saying with listening and feedback. So I started the Muse, I guess, about 1.5 years ago in September of 2011. It's my second company, and I learned a lot of the communication lessons from the first. But it's interesting, with every startup, you've got days where everything's going your way, where you suddenly kind of signed a big partnership with Forbes and L'Oreal on the same day, and kind of the world's your oyster. And then you have other days where you've got to fire kind of a core member of the team for trying to hold people hostage over more equity or more salary. And I think one of the kind of big early lessons for us was making sure that we had a variety of different channels to communicate with our employees, with my 2 other co-founders, and with the rest of the team. So we've done a couple of different things. We have all hands meetings every other Friday, which I think is a little bit similar to the Retro Friday idea. We kind of have an open floor. People can ask.
Do you have booze?
We don't yet. It's actually partially because we have about 60% of our team is in New York City, and then we have a couple people in San Francisco and 1 in LA. So we do a combination in-person and virtual. And I think we're looking forward to the day in which we have booze, but for now, no. It actually would probably help, because I think people would be even more comfortable maybe to ask questions. One of the things we did was actually put up a virtual blind suggestion box. So we've got a form that is completely untraceable, where people can ask any sort of questions. And during the meeting and before the meeting, I'll pull up the form and see what people have been asking. Because I think there are questions that people are willing to look you in the eye and say, how are we financially? What's the status of the fundraise? What happened with this person that left? I heard the story, but I want to know more, whatever it is. And there are other things that people are afraid to ask with their name attached. And so it was very important for us when we started doing this to make sure we had a forum for people to ask any questions in a manner that didn't kind of implicate them in the asking. And we've also found that it's really helpful to have kind of every 3 months a much more involved, or we call them kind of team learnings. So we try and make them fun. We did our first one in Tahoe We did our second one in New York. We sort of flew everyone in and did some really neat events. But we take usually about 3 hours and really, really dig into who we are as a team and as individuals. And so for us, I'm an ex-McKinsey management consultant. And so we actually took some of the ideas from the way that McKinsey teams work together. And one of the things is we sit down, we ask everyone before coming to take the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator, because we actually find that sometimes a couple of the preferences can be very indicative of how you tend to make decisions, sometimes how you tend to argue. What do you think is most important in a decision? In our team, there's a big kind of, you can tell to some extent who's a T and who's an F. And I think the way people say that you fit on that spectrum is if you were the coach of an under 7-year-old soccer team that was undefeated, and you were asked to send 2 of your players to the US national under 7 soccer team, how would you choose who goes? So the answer is probably about half of you are thinking, well, obviously I'd pick the 2 best players. And the other half of you are thinking, well, I'd pick the 2 players who try really hard, the ones who don't miss practice, who really help others, who've got the great team spirit. And generally the first group is T's and the second group is F's. Obviously it's a bit of a heuristic, but it is interesting.
Did anybody think like 7-year-olds do not belong at a national tournament? Keep them home.
I haven't heard
Keep
it yet,
them in
but
school.
maybe that's a new category. But it is interesting, and so we'll sit down in a group, and we started doing this when we were 6 employees, and we've kind of continued doing it every 3 months. And I think when we get too big to do it all as a group, we'll probably do it in departments. But so we ask people to, we go around. First of all, what's your Myers-Briggs type, and do you think it's accurate? What did it tell you anything interesting? 2, we talk about preferred working times and styles. So we're lucky to have a very flexible team. We have one guy who gets in at 8 a.m. on the dot every morning, and one person who prefers to get in, at 10:30. But she'll work very late at night because she's a kind of night owl, and he likes to be done at 6. And so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about, if I have a question for you, do you prefer to get an email, a text message, a chat on our internal chat tool, a call? Some people hate talking on the phone. It's kind of helpful to know that. And then we also all share one personal and one professional goal. And that's really nice because sometimes you'd never know that, the guy who just joined your team as kind of a junior engineer is dying to do more public speaking and would love to get an opportunity to go before a local tech meetup and present your technology. It's also kind of helpful if one of our kind of customer relations management employees was really passionate about cooking more at home, and so that was her personal goal. When she shared that, then as a team, we could every now and then be like, oh wait, we're going to schedule this meeting sort of during dinner your time. Why don't we move it? Because I remember that you wanted to cook more at home and I want to support that. So I think that creates kind of a really nice atmosphere where you both understand and can empower people to work more effectively. And if you are asking them to work, against their preferences, which is fine, at least you're sort of all on this, on the same page about the way that they're most effective.
Are those 3 hours primarily for more soft side issues, if you will, as opposed to strategy, goals, revenue, et cetera?
Yeah, we keep 2 or 3 hours for the softer issues, and we do also go through our goals as a company, the product roadmap, the kind of financial situation. We talk through where we plan to be in 3 months. We do all of that, but we kind of have focused on making it a bit separate to say now we want to really dig into who are we as a team and build that culture, because I think one of the big advantages of starting a company is you really can create and shape the type of company that you want to be in. And companies are very different. In fact, one of the neat things about our product at the Muse is we feature profiles of companies' offices, their culture, their employees, talking a video about what it's like, and it's a hiring product, but it also lets us see what all of these other companies, from the big ones like Gucci or Sephora or AOL to very, very small companies, what they're doing, how their culture might be different from ours, and make, I think, very deliberate choices. Because once you've set a culture in place, as you were saying, it's so much harder to change.
What was the learning that you would have from your first business?
So I would have a giant long list of learnings from my first business. The biggest one, which is not as relevant to this talk, is to get a lawyer to do your company documents, because if you write them on notebook paper, you could end up in a really bad situation. But
there's a famous movie about that, I think.
Yeah, it might be a book about it someday too. I think one of the biggest is to pay attention to red flags and kind of think proactively about what are your non-negotiables in the people that you work with versus what are personal preferences. I firmly believe that to really have a successful team, you need to be on the same page about kind of your core values and ethics and this, very essential things that are the baseline to a good team. And I think it can be very tempting, especially if you're in a situation where you're resource strapped, where you feel like you're, struggling against the odds, sort of the David and Goliath, to accept someone who doesn't meet those or doesn't align with you from a kind of core value standpoint, but who has other advantages. And I think in my first company situation, I overlooked some things that I knew kind of in my gut were a problem because I wanted so badly to kind of have, this other kind of things on board, this person and some of the advantages they brought on board. And I would say I think that's a mistake that I've learned very much.
One of the things that you said to me, and I think we're almost ready to close up shop here, but one of the things you had said to me was how important it is to decide not only who is the face and the outgoing part of or the outward-facing part of a company, but also as you're putting together a small organization, making sure that the skill set and the learning is aligned so that you don't have two people who really believe that they are really great at X, because then you're going to have like a turf war between you.
Yeah, and I think that's particularly important in small teams, although I'm sure that I think it's very relevant across a lot of others, but particularly if you were starting something, I think dividing and conquering is very important in the early days because, again, there's so much to do and so little to do it with that if you don't have each person tackling something and if you're doubling up on efforts because two people can't agree about who should be doing it, that's a waste that you really can't afford to have. And I think I advise a lot of startups now, and one of the biggest reasons I see for teams splitting, losing a member, often companies fail because the team split, is that you have more than one person who is convinced that they are the best at a certain thing. And I think one of the things that was very lucky about when I started the Muse is I have two co-founders and we are very, very different. And we sat down, we actually spent a lot of time, even though we felt like all teams do that time is running out or we're spending down the little money that we have left. But we dedicated some good time in the early days to saying we each can do all sorts of things, but we're all going to come to the table and agree on exactly what each of us is best at. And my two co-founders and I kind of made that decision early on that the press was only going to write about one or maybe two of us. I think if you're a two-person group, the two of you can get written about, but if you have more than two people in a founding story, generally there will be one as the focus of a specific story. And so we decided, based on what had happened in the previous company, that we wanted to be very targeted. And it's been helpful as the profile of the company has risen and as we've gotten opportunities to go speak on CNBC or to do different things, that we are kind of all very aligned on how we're going to handle the press and who's the public face of the company. And that doesn't mean we don't revisit it and talk about it all the time and make sure that, again, like I talk a lot to my co-founders, what are your personal and professional goals so that we can make sure that we're all getting enough of what we need, because there's always, there's so much work to do that you want to make sure that you're aligned about who gets to do some of the more fun stuff as well.
Great. Jason, he's here.
Yeah. We were going to do questions, but I think we may have run out of time.
We can do questions in the audience at lunch.
Well, when the Daily Muse goes public, you can just remember that you had this little intimate chit-chat here on the stage in Sun Valley with Dent. So again, thank you very much.